Hey guys, it's Lord of the Pogs. Rotten Tomatoes is a popular movie reviewer, and it's a great resource when deciding what movie to see. But it's not always right. I've compiled a list of 15 movies at random with two criteria. It has to be a movie I've seen, and there has to be a large disparity between the Rotten Tomatoes score and the audience score. I'll go over each one, and then decide if I side with Rotten Tomatoes or with the audience. Number 1 is 2019's The Lion King, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 52% and an audience score of 88%. Rotten Tomatoes says, while it can take pride in its visual achievements, The Lion King is a by-the-numbers retelling that lacks the energy and heart that made the original so beloved, though for some fans that may just be enough. Beginning on June 24, 2019, which marked the 25th anniversary of the release of the original film, in its first 24 hours of pre-sales, The Lion King became the second best pre-seller of 2019. Atom Tickets reported it was their best ever first-day sales for a family film. It went on to debut the highest opening total of the Disney reimaginings of animated films, beating Beauty and the Beast. The movie became the second animated film to have grossed $500 million at North America box office after Incredibles 2. I grew up with the original Lion King, and this was a great throwback to my childhood. I have to side with the audience. Number 2 is 2014's Noah, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 76% and an audience score of 41%. Rotten Tomatoes says, with sweeping visuals grounded by strong performances in service of a timeless tale told on a human scale, Darren Aronofsky's Noah brings the Bible epic into the 21st century. The film was challenged for its lack of non-white characters, seen by some as a throwback to the Hollywood era of all-white casts in today's multi-ethnic America. Co-writer Ari Handel addressed these concerns. From the beginning, we were concerned about casting, the issue of race. What we realized is that this story is functioning at the level of myth, and as a mythical story, the race of the individuals doesn't matter. The film generated controversy centered on the film's use of extra-biblical, non-canonical sources as inspiration for elements of the script rather than just the book of Genesis. Stepping away from the biblical narrative, Noah was fine as a standalone film, but I've seen what Darren Aronofsky is capable of, and this was not one of his better films. I have to side with the audience. Number 3 is The Greatest Showman, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 57% and an audience score of 86%. Rotten Tomatoes says The Greatest Showman tries hard to dazzle the audience with a Barnum-style sense of wonder, but at the expense of its complex subject's far more intriguing real-life story. It's the third highest grossing musical ever in North America and also the third highest globally. The Greatest Showman finished fourth at the box office behind Star Wars The Last Jedi, Jumanji Welcome to the Jungle, and Pitch Perfect 3. The second weekend increase marked the largest ever for a film playing in over 3,000 theaters and the fourth biggest ever. The first time I saw this movie, I fell in love with the soundtrack, but it's not just the music. The visuals and the choreography are extraordinary. I don't know too much about P.T. Barnum the person, but I don't know how anybody could watch The Greatest Showman and not love it. I have to side with the audience. Number 4 is 2009's Drag Me to Hell, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 92% and an audience score of 62%. Rotten Tomatoes says, Sam Raimi returns to top form with Drag Me to Hell, a frightening, hilarious, delightfully campy thrill ride. The film opened at number 4, falling to number 7 in its second weekend. Kyle Smith of the New York Post thought it was cheesy with too many gross-outs. Rex Reed of the New York Observer thought the plot wasn't believable enough, and Peter Howell of the Toronto Star disliked Alison Lohman's performance and thought it was just not very funny. I remember seeing this movie in the theater, and I went in for a horror movie. I'm generally not one for horror comedy, but I thought this movie was creative. I've got to side with Rotten Tomatoes on this one. Number 5 is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 50% and an audience score of 89%. Rotten Tomatoes says, visually creative but also aimless, repetitive, and devoid of character development. The movie reignited interest in Hunter S. Thompson's novel. Vintage Press reported an initial reprint of 100,000 copies to tie in with the film's release, but demand was higher than expected and forced the novel to go back to print 5 more times. Film critic Gene Siskel's thumbs-up review at the time also noted the film successfully captured the book's themes about the worst, the extremes, the money obsession, and the visual vulgarity of America. Michael O'Sullivan gave the film a positive review in the Washington Post. What elevates the tale from being a mere drug chronicle is the same thing that lifted the book into the realm of literature. Empire magazine voted the film 469th greatest films in their 500 greatest movies of all time list. I watched this movie and I was not into it. It failed to draw me in. I've got to side with Rotten Tomatoes on this one. Number 6 is The Butterfly Effect, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 34% and an audience score of 81%. Rotten Tomatoes says the premise is intriguing, but it's placed in the service of an overwrought and tasteless thriller. The film was a commercial success, claiming the #1 spot in its opening weekend. Film critic Roger Ebert wrote that the plot provides a showcase for acting talent, since the actors have to play characters who go through wild swings. Matt Sorgel of the Florida Times-Union said The Butterfly Effect is preposterous, feverish, creepy, and stars Ashton Kutcher in a dramatic role. It's a blast, a solidly entertaining B-movie. It's even quite funny at times. The Miami Herald said The Butterfly Effect is better than you might expect, despite its awkward, slow beginning, drawing you in gradually and paying off in surprisingly effective and bittersweet ways. I've always been very intrigued by the concept of the butterfly effect, and I thought this movie explored that really effectively. I've got to side with the audience. Number 7 is Star Wars The Last Jedi, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 91% and an audience score of 43%. Rotten Tomatoes says Star Wars The Last Jedi honors the saga's rich legacy while adding some surprising twists, and delivering all the emotion-rich action fans could hope for. Emily Vanderwerf of Vox found that dissatisfied fans saw the film as too progressive, disliked its humor, plot, or character arcs. Some viewers felt betrayed that it ignored fan theories held so strongly that it was difficult for them to accept different stories. Particularly divisive was the reveal that Rey's parents are insignificant and Luke's actions contradicted his previous heroic portrayal. I love a good fan theory. I've got some fan theories myself, and maybe I'll explore those more in another video. But one of the great things about fan theories is they're not necessarily reflective of the filmmaker's vision. I really liked Star Wars The Last Jedi. I've got to side with Rotten Tomatoes on this one. Number 8 is 2016's reboot of Ghostbusters, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 73% and an audience score of 49%. Rotten Tomatoes says Ghostbusters does an impressive job of standing on its own as a freewheeling, marvelously cast supernatural comedy, even if it can't help but pale somewhat in comparison with the classic original. The film opened July 15th, and by August, sources such as Forbes and the Wall Street Journal had begun calling Ghostbusters a box office bomb. Observer critic Mark Kermode awarded the film 3 out of 5 stars. It would have been great to report that the finished film is good enough to shut the bigoted naysayers up once and for all. The harsh truth is that it isn't. Richard Lawson, writing for Vanity Fair, said the film spends so much time doing battle with its legacy that it forgets to be its own movie, putting a talented cast to waste. I think Richard Lawson put it really well. The movie was funny in places, but it didn't seem well put together, and it just didn't hold up. I've got to side with the audience. Number 9 is Spy Kids, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 93% and an audience score of 46%. Rotten Tomatoes says, a kinetic and fun movie that's sure to thrill children of all ages. I looked through the audience reviews on the Rotten Tomatoes website. I looked at audience reviews from other sources, and I couldn't find one single solid reason why anybody didn't like this movie. I've got to side with Rotten Tomatoes. Number 10 is Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 30% and an audience score of 61%. Rotten Tomatoes says Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Men Tell No Tales proves that neither a change in directors nor an undead Javier Bardem is enough to drain this sinking franchise's murky bilge. The film became the highest-grossing entry of the Pirates franchise internationally. It finished first at the box office, ahead of Guardians of the Galaxy 2 and Baywatch, performing better than Disney's previous Memorial Day releases, Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, Tomorrowland, and Alice Through the Looking Glass. Richard Roper of the Chicago Sun-Times said Dead Man works well enough as a standalone, swashbuckling comedic spectacle. Pete Hammond of Deadline Hollywood called it the most entertaining installment. Leah Greenblatt of Entertainment Weekly praised the fun nature of the film. Ashley Esqueda of CNET argued that it brought the franchise back to what made its first two installments so fun. Brian Truitt of USA Today said what was once a past-its-prime franchise seems to have found new life. I remember watching the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, and I remember watching Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Men Tell No Tales in the theater thinking, this makes me feel like a kid again. I've got to side with the audience. Number 11 is 2015's We Are Still Here, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 95% and an audience score of 48%. Rotten Tomatoes says smart, powerfully acted, and devilishly clever, We Are Still Here offers some novel twists on familiar territory, and heralds the arrival of a major talent in writer-director. I can't figure out why more people didn't like this movie. I remember watching it and thinking, they don't make movies like this anymore. And when I found out that it was a new movie, I was amazed. Because the fact is, they don't make movies like this anymore, but somehow the filmmakers figured it out. I've got to side with Rotten Tomatoes on this one. Number 12 is Rise of Skywalker, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 52% and an audience score of 86%. Rotten Tomatoes says The Rise of Skywalker suffers from a frustrating lack of imagination, but concludes this beloved saga with fan-focused devotion. Star Wars Rise of Skywalker was the 7th highest-grossing film of 2019 and sold more tickets in their first hour of availability than the previous record holder for ticket sales, Avengers Endgame, selling more than twice the number of tickets as The Last Jedi sold in the same time frame, and outsold all previous Star Wars films, the 3rd highest opening ever for a December release, and the 12th highest of all time. On Post-Track, audiences gave the film an average of 4 stars out of 5, with 70% of respondents rating it as a definite recommend. Michael Phillips for Chicago Tribune wrote that the film does the job, wrapping up the trio of trilogies begun in 1977 in a confident way, doing all that is cinematically possible to avoid upsetting the tradition-minded quadrants of the Star Wars fanbase. Owen Gleiberman of Variety called the film the most elegant, emotionally rounded, and gratifying Star Wars adventure since the glory days of Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. I'm not at all ashamed to say Rise of Skywalker is my favorite Star Wars film. The Empire Strikes Back is a close second, but I really like Rise of Skywalker because it ties everything together, going as far back as The Phantom Menace. I've got to side with the audience. Number 13 is 2019's Aladdin, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 57% and an audience score of 94%. Rotten Tomatoes says Aladdin retells its classic sources material with sufficient spectacle and skill, even if it never approaches the dazzling splendor of the animated original. Aladdin crossed the $1 billion mark on July 26, 2019, becoming the 41st film to ever reach that milestone. It was the 3rd biggest opening of 2019 behind Avengers Endgame and Captain Marvel, the 5th highest Memorial Day launch ever, as well as the best debut of Richie's career and the 2nd best of Will Smith's, and on its 5th day was the biggest post-Memorial Day Tuesday ever. By the end of June, the film surpassed Independence Day to become the highest-grossing film of Will Smith's career. I grew up with Disney's Aladdin, but I liked the remake better than the original. I liked the music better, and I actually thought Will Smith did a better job as the genie than Robin Williams. I've got to side with the audience. Number 14 is Ants, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 93% and an audience score of 52%. Rotten Tomatoes says featuring a stellar voice cast, technically dazzling animation, and loads of good humor, Ants should delight both children and adults. All I could find as far as why the audience score is so low is that Ants failed to outgross the competition with A Bug's Life, and really I think that's what it comes down to. People either love Ants and not A Bug's Life so much, or they love A Bug's Life and they don't really like Ants. Me, I loved Ants when it came out, but I wasn't as enthralled with A Bug's Life. So I've got to side with Rotten Tomatoes on this one. Number 15 is Room 237, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 94% and an audience score of 55%. Rotten Tomatoes says mysterious and provocative Room 237 is a fascinating journey into the world of obsessive cinephiles. Kyle Smith of the New York Post deemed the theories put forward in the movie laughable and said to be enlightening or entertaining, the analysis has to persuade or at least be clever. Leon Vitali, who served as personal assistant to Kubrick on the film, said there were ideas espoused in the movie that I know to be total balderdash. For example, the film's usage of a German typewriter, interpreted to be symbolic of the Holocaust, was chosen by Kubrick for pragmatic reasons. He concluded that Kubrick didn't tell an audience what to think or how to think, and if everyone came out thinking something differently, that was fine with him. That said, I'm certain that he wouldn't have wanted to listen to about 70 or maybe 80% of Room 237 because it's pure gibberish. I certainly thought the theories put forward in Room 237 were interesting, but I was somewhat disappointed to learn that they were based more on speculation than on what the filmmakers intended to be taken away. So I've got to side with the audience. Thanks for watching. My Rotten Tomatoes score is 6 and my audience score is 9. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Please let me know in the comments. Please drop a tip if you like what you see, and don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that little bell in the corner to get notifications on more videos like this one.